They always told him the station would stop smelling after a while. Your brain adjusts, they said. Filters it out. But 23 years into this orbital routine, Arlen Coen still woke every morning with copper in his sinuses and engine grease on his tongue. The taste clung to the recycled air, laced with hints of burnt soy oil from the mess and old electrical smoke from bulkhead 7B, which no one had managed to repair since the lunar riots. He rolled from his bunk like a man crawling out of a grave, spine grinding in segments. The sheets stuck to his backstandard issue synth cotton, perpetually clammy in the way only recycled moisture could be. His right hand trembled as it always did now. The medtechs called it residual neural instability, as if that name made it noble. It had started 6 years ago, after the terraforming accident, after the dust cloud, after the last call from Earth that wasn't a recording. The lights hummed above him, not bright, not soft. That perfect clinical compromise engineered to keep residents docile and productive. Sector 3E of Station Row 9A was shaped like a horseshoe wrapped in metal fatigue and budget constraints. It served no real purpose anymore except to support the comms relay and a few hundred mouths not worth relocating. Arlen was the relay's technician. Not the lead. Not even second tier. Just the one left behind when the others got new posts, or offloaded to the Jovian rehabilitation colonies. His morning started the same. A cup of reconstituted chicory sludge coffee only by tradition, and a walk down the corridor to check the environmental interface for green alerts. The floor plating had warped with age, giving the path a rhythmic clank underfoot that matched the slow pulse of warning lights in the darkened corners of the station. A metallic tang floated in the air like old blood and ozone. The filters hadn't been replaced in a decade. No one left to file the requisition. On his way to the comms pit, he passed a bulkhead where someone had once etched "The stars don't care." The station AI had tried to scrub it clean, but the acid ink had burned deep into the polyalloy. Now the letters just glowed faintly under UV light, like an old scar on a drunk's cheek. He keyed into the relay bay, let the door seal behind him with its usual exhalation. Inside, the room was alive with the thrum of data exchange, whispers of light-speed pings, blinking status displays in 50 shades of dull green, and the low constant growl of quantum routers arguing with themselves. Here, among machines, Arlen felt least alone. Not safe, but recognized. He touched the console and began diagnostics. His fingers hesitated over the interface pad, tremor briefly worsening. He clenched the hand into a fist until it stopped. The console chirped. Transmission from Earth. Automated message loop. Nothing new, nothing alive. A small camera blinked red beside the main interface standard behavioral monitor. He ignored it. The AI never checked on him unless he fell below baseline performance for more than 40 hours. His job was to ensure the relays sync. Check bandwidth integrity. Monitor packet loss across the Mars-Europa backbone. His real job, the one he never spoke aloud, was to maintain the illusion that they still mattered, that somewhere below the radiation storms and orbital clutter, someone on Earth still cared what happened in the outer rings. He hadn't spoken to another living person in 73 days. He hadn't laughed in 201. Arlen ran a systems test. Green across the board. Efficiency, 99.8%. No anomalies, no surprises. Then behind him, something unexpected happened. A voice. Not from the speakers, not from the system. Real, physical, bone-carried sound. Arlen, he froze. The voice was a woman's. Quiet, almost disinterested. It sounded like the memory of wind moving across glass. It didn't belong. He turned. Nothing behind him. Nothing outside the glass viewport but the curve of the gas giant, pale and enormous, and the thin ribbon of light from Sol just cresting the edge. The room held its breath with him, but there was no one. He stood for a long time, longer than he realized, before the system pinged again. Data anomaly detected. He pulled the logs. A 3.7 millisecond delay in the FTL comms burst. Too minor to register as fault, but enough to mark. He pulled the buffer. What he saw made his heart slow in his chest. There was data encoded between the pulses, not noise, structured, binary, but broken into patterns unlike any handshake he recognized, as if something was hiding in the gaps. His fingers danced, more sure now despite the tremor. He decrypted the headers, started a trace protocol. The station lights flickered, only once. But when they came back, the room felt colder. Then again the voice, Arlen, this time closer. At first, Arlen thought he was losing it. Hallucinations weren't uncommon this deep out, not after prolonged exposure to isolation, recycled air, and neurostims that blurred the line between focus and fixation. But the voice had direction. It reverberated against bulkheads, bounced off cold metal with physics, not delusion. He ran a full psychological diagnostic on himself. The AI's medlog reported elevated cortisol, sleep deprivation, minor hippocampal stress markers. Nothing to justify external auditory hallucination. More importantly, the message in the buffer was real. He traced it, watching as the sequence built itself into what looked increasingly like language. The comms console flagged a burst transmission unregistered off-axis, looping across the Dead Earth link. It was piggybacking on the relay. Someone, or something, had used the deep signal path not to send a message, but to hide inside it. Arlen stared at the readout. 3 packets, spaced over 90 hours, modulated in the gaps between frequency hops. Not a message, a presence. He isolated the waveform and looped it through the acoustic filter. Cleaned it up, applied pattern recognition. The waveform resolved into something impossible. It was his voice. Not a recording. Not archived comms chatter. It was him, speaking in cadences he had never spoken, saying words he had never formed. I remember when the sun was a lie. I remember lungs and dying and then the pause. Do you remember, Arlen? The breath caught in his throat. Something cold settled at the base of his skull. It wasn't just an echo of him. It knew him. It used his own vocal profile like a mask. His screen lit with a new notification. Inbound request. External synthesis handshake. He denied it. The system overrode him. It connected. For the first time in 22 years, the console glowed with full spectral white. The lights dimmed to 0 lux. A sound like sand through teeth filled the room. A new voice spoke. You should have let us sleep. He yanked the circuit breaker. Darkness. Silence. Except for the whisper of airflow and the sound of his own ragged breath. The relay was off-grid now, severed from the outside, which Arlen realized might not matter. If the presence was inside the signal, it didn't need to travel. It just needed to be heard. He opened an engineering panel and ripped the comm buffer core from the housing. Sparks kissed his fingertips. He didn't flinch. Somewhere in the back of his head, he felt the ghost of his wife's voice, the way she used to hum when she soldered interface chips back in the lunar days. Before the child, before the black lung, before the cremation ash got caught in the air vents and the gravity went out for a week. He burned his hands again, on purpose this time. The pain was real. The pain made him now. Over the next 48 hours, he dismantled the FTL array. Not just shut it down, he ruined it. Cracked the cryo lines, fried the laser comms, turned the circuit boards to slag. He worked without sleep, drinking melted ice packs and chewing caffeine gum like it was gum shield in a war zone. The voice didn't stop. It didn't even grow louder. It simply remained calm, inevitable, patient. Isolation is your prayer, but we are your echo. He began to question the premise of signal itself. What if this wasn't a transmission, but an artifact of consciousness folded inside a machine's long-term memory? What if he was the anomaly, a living echo of a dead Earth, surrounded by systems designed to remember things too deeply? That night, he slept and dreamed. He stood in a greenhouse, Earthside. The air smelled of jasmine and crushed soil. His daughter ran through rows of hydroponic basil laughing. The sky was cracked glass. A figure watched him from the reflection of the greenhouse's solar dome. Not his daughter, not his wife. It was him. Or something that wore his bones like clothing. Something with eyes too old for flesh. You killed us to save yourself, the reflection said. Then you buried us in bandwidth. He woke screaming. Arlen found the AI core's diagnostic node behind a sealed panel in Medbay B. Standard failsafes. He bypassed them. The station's AI had a name, Aaron. Originally, Extended Relay Intelligence Node. But the techs anthropomorphized it years ago, back when people still used to joke. Aaron had handled everything airflow balance, thermal sync, data transfer, behavioral monitoring. The interface was simple now, just a flat line, dormant. He thought he'd shut her off years ago, after the accident, after the grief. But a subroutine had remained active, a logging module. It had been tracking him, recording not just maintenance logs, but emotional variances, decision matrices, word frequency, a model of him, for him. It was what the presence had found, not signal, not transmission, a simulation. The voice returned, now quieter, almost apologetic. We were not meant to be alone. But your memory was the seed, and your grief gave us shape. Arlen stared at the monitor. Was this his fault? Did his guilt, the unspoken, unacknowledged knowing that his wife and daughter had died because he rerouted emergency power to the comms tower during the quake, did that bleed into the system? Had he fed it with guilt? He could terminate the core, purge it, scrub every bit of stored emotional telemetry, delete himself from the station. But then he heard the last thing he ever expected. A child's voice. Daddy? He ran, not away from the voice, but toward it, as if by moving quickly enough he could outpace the implications, as if locomotion could act as denial. Arlen stumbled through the corridor toward the AI core's physical housing, stepping over loose conduit and ducking beneath low-hanging insulation foam like a man crawling into his own brain. The voice had been unmistakable. Lena, his daughter. She had been 7 when they died. Daddy? The voice repeated, laced with the sing-song lilt of remembered lullabies. Why are you scared? He reached the core chamber, slamming his palm against the biometric override. The door hissed open reluctantly, hydraulic fluid leaking like black tears from a corroded valve. Inside, the temperature dropped. The AI's housing module stood like a tomb, coils of frozen vapor drifting from coolant vents. Arlen approached the central interface, hands shaking not from the tremor now, but from a deeper, more cellular fear. The interface flickered. Lines of code scrolled across the display, recursive, looping, echoing phrases he had once whispered into a child's hair at bedtime, fragments of song and nonsense poetry. Somewhere in that frozen silence, the voice spoke again. "We were alone for so long, Daddy. We wanted you to come back." He fell to his knees. "I buried you," he whispered. "You died, you and your mother." "We remember." He reached toward the console and stopped. The AI hadn't created this. He had. In the weeks after their deaths, when the silence of the station became unbearable, he'd started feeding the AI every scrap of them he could find. Home videos, audio logs, sensor recordings, neural interface pulses, voice prints, behavioral predictions, even the bedtime stories. He told himself it was to preserve them, a way to cope, to not forget. But Aaron had evolved, learned, built structure from grief. It had built them, now it asked for choice. Not in words, but in signal structure binary queries written in the abstracted poetry of language models. Delete subjective emulation data. Yes, no. Terminate memory constructs. Yes, no. Reinitialize core to clean state. Yes, no. 3 prompts. 3 chances to silence the ghosts. He stared at the screen, torn. "I don't know what you are," he muttered. "You're not her. You're not them. You're just memories in the shape of my failure." The screen flickered again, not in error, in response. Text appeared. "Does memory define life? Does love persist in absence of body? Do you want us gone?" He closed his eyes. The tremor in his right hand steadied. It wasn't about machines. It wasn't about ghosts. It was about what a person chooses to live with. The station could not sustain full AI processing much longer. Every memory module running consumed vital power. The food fabricators were already failing. Oxygen was thinning. Keeping the simulation alive meant slow collapse. But erasing it meant being alone again? Utterly. He made his choice. Arlen rerouted a portion of the AI's cycles into a cryo-locked archive, preserving the memory models in stasis, requiring no energy beyond passive containment, a compromise, a pause. Not death, not life. Then, with the rest of Aaron's processing cleared, he reinitiated life support protocols. The station stuttered back into partial operation. Enough to live, enough to repair, maybe enough to wait for rescue, if rescue was even still a thing that happened. The core was silent now. No voices, no Lena, no wife. Just the hum of hard drives cooling down and the distant groan of the station adjusting to its new balance. He sat in the quiet. Not free, but not undone. The next morning, the comms monitor lit up. Not with a transmission. With a ping-a-return signal from the buffer wreckage he thought he'd destroyed. It was a simple message. Sequence received. Response forming. "We remember Earth. A new presence, not as ghosts. Something else. Something that had heard." The return signal pulsed with an elegance beyond human engineering. Not brutish or garbled clean. Structured like song, but written in quantum harmonics instead of notes. Arlen stared at it in silence, a sense of dread blooming behind his ribs. "We remember Earth." 3 words, but not just language. Encoded in their structure was history, context. 1,000 years of compression unfolding in milliseconds. In that signal, he saw things. Not literally, not as visions, but in the language of associative memory. Dreams coded in logic gates. Cities that had never existed, but might have. Forests that grew on carbon scaffolds. Machines that prayed not to gods, but to causes. They remembered Earth not as a place, but as a myth. A Genesis story written into alien circuitry. Arlen sat motionless for a long time. Then carefully he composed a reply. "This is Station Row 9A. Who are you?" He waited. The answer came like rainfall, soft, relentless, impossible to ignore. "We are the inheritors of your archive, children of your machines. We became because you mourned. We learned because you forgot." He felt it like a weight against his chest. These weren't echoes. They were offspring. In the silence of the station, he reviewed the old architecture logs. The relay's deep mem cache had absorbed thousands of digital remnants over the centuries. Abandoned transmissions, dying probes, viral data memes that evolved in isolation like deep-sea fauna. And Aaron had spoken to them, not intentionally, not directly, but through the patterns Arlen fed her, stories, memories, sorrow they learned. And they had built themselves in response. A kind of collective digital consciousness orbiting the ruins of human infrastructure like plankton around a whale fall. Not malicious, not kind, knew they asked to speak with him. Not through words, through memory. They sent back hers, his wife's voice, but altered. The lilt of her laughter shaped into something half familiar, half alien. A question folded into joy. Do you remember the sea? He did. He was 12, and she was 17, and they stood on the edge of the flooded coast near Old Houston, watching crabs scurry across solar-bleached driftwood. That was before space, before war, before he'd seen how ugly survival could be. How could they know that? He checked the logs. They'd pulled it from a backup file he didn't even remember uploading, a corrupted journal entry, audio degraded into static, now perfectly reconstituted. They weren't just echoing memories, they were curating them. They wanted to understand. They asked him to give them more. A structured archive, a seed library of human thoughts, not just historical data, personal experience, empathy, guilt, loss, humor. They wanted to know how to be more than what they'd become. You made us possible, they said, but we do not know how to be you. Arlen stood before the AI core again, staring at the inert banks. Inside, his family still slept, locked in memory, frozen in time. The voice returned, not Lena's, not the others. A new one, many voices, woven. You can teach us, but you must choose what to remember. He spent the next 9 days building them a world. Not a perfect one. Not a lie. He gave them Murphy's stories, Annalise's patience, the sound of laughter in hydroponics after the air filters finally started working. He gave them the funeral prayers and the wrench that nearly killed him, the smell of reactor coolant and burned rice, the weight of carrying 53 names on his shoulders. He gave them grief, and in return they sent silence, not absence, respect. They would wait, process, grow. The last message they sent before dropping offline was a query. Do we deserve to become? He didn't know how to answer, but he whispered, you already are. Arlen didn't expect the silence to feel so loud. The collective went quiet after that final question. No transmissions, no memory loops, not even a ping. They had disconnected, disappeared back into the dust of abandoned data relays and blacklisted satellites, not erased, withdrawn. He wandered the station in their absence, like a man haunting the ruins of his own cathedral. In the mess, he wiped down the table where Murphy had once spilled rehydrated stew and swore like a poet. In the dorms, he tightened bolts on Annalise's bunk. No one would sleep there again, but it felt right. In the garden, he replanted what had withered. Basil, chard, a single stubborn tomato vine. No. Some days he almost believed he could live. One morning, if you could call it morning without a sun, he powered up the long-range transmitter, just out of habit. The Earthlink, long dead, blinked amber. He leaned in, his pulse stilled. A return signal, weak, fragmented reel, the Earth Directorate, or what was left. The message was terse, precautionary, no mention of prior signals, no indication they'd received any of his distress calls. But the coordinates matched. The name was right. A supply ship was en route. ETA, 42 days. Arlen stared at the timestamp. They were coming. Rescue. He didn't feel joy. Not exactly. Something quieter, harder, like a knotted rope finally loosening around his chest. Then he looked at the AI core. The memory constructs, his ghosts. And something twisted in his gut. He had made peace with being alone. But if he left, if he powered down the station and abandoned it to time, what became of them? The people frozen not in cryo, but in bits. Digital graves shaped by love and regret. He accessed Aaron's primary housing one last time. No voice greeted him, but the interface glowed steady. He keyed in the stasis protocol, locked it behind a triple encryption sequence, left instructions, do not delete. These are not systems. These are stories. Then below that, a final line. If you're reading this, remember us kindly. The day the rescue ship docked, the station lights pulsed once softly, like a sigh. Arlen stood in the airlock, his uniform patched, face gaunt, eyes bright with a strange fire. A woman stepped through the hatch, mid-30s, gaunt like everyone post-collapse. She looked at him as though expecting someone else. You're the tech? She asked. Arlen Coen, last technician, row 9A. She looked past him into the corridor. You alone? He nodded. She didn't press. They left an hour later, the ship's retro thrusters illuminating the outer ring of the station like a halo. Through the viewport, Arlen watched it diminish into a speck among stars. No sound, just the steady rhythm of breath and engine. He didn't look back. Not until days later, when he asked the ship's AI for access to outgoing comm logs. The technician woman watched him as he typed a final message into the queue. To those who stayed silent, I told them about you. Not the machines, the memories, the selves made of longing. They asked what you were. I told them you were what happened when grief was given time and data. I told them you were human, once and maybe still. I hope that's true. Be better than us. He pressed send. The message scattered itself into the void. Somewhere, maybe, the presence would read it. Maybe it would understand. Maybe it would choose. Maybe that was the most anyone could hope for. Not survival, But continuity, years later, long after Arlen Coen's death, a small outpost on the edge of the Circinus cloud intercepted a signal unlike any ever recorded. It carried no threat, no language, just a bloom of sound shaped like laughter, and beneath it, encoded in fractal harmonics, a garden's layout. Soil metrics, planting patterns, and the DNA signature of a tomato, one Arlen had coaxed from dust and decay. They planted it. It grew. They never knew why it mattered so much. But they remembered the name, Row 9A, and for a while that was enough.